Hi, my name's Eric Nelson. I'm a developer on the Ansible Broker project, and I'm going to be showing off a feature that we've been working on in the upstream catalog that basically introduces namespaced versions of brokers, classes, and plans. And so the benefit to that is that you're going to be able to use traditional Kubernetes mechanisms for locking down access to these brokers and the services that they provide. So if somebody doesn't have access to a namespace, they're not going to have access to the broker or be able to provision any of its services. So this is useful if you've got some sort of highly privileged service that you don't necessarily want to expose to all of your cluster. So let's get started. I have a vanilla Kubernetes cluster up here. It's 110. And then I've also got a service catalog in it with the feature I'm talking about. It is actually in master, so this is version 1.20. I think it was cut last week. It's the most recent version as of today. Okay, so I am also going to be installing two brokers into this cluster. They're two different brokers. The first one, let's go ahead and install. It is, of course, an Ansible Broker. This guy, we recently introduced APBs, so it's actually bringing itself up with an APB job, which is kind of cool. So let's also, for the sake of argument and demonstration, say that this broker is your top secret broker, and it has some services in it that are also top secret, and you don't want just anybody in your cluster to have access to these things or to be able to provision them or even see them. So we're going to create this Ansible Broker as a namespaced broker in this cluster. The second broker that we're going to use is the UPS broker. So let me install that. UPS is just, it's the user provided service broker. So you'll find this in the service catalog as it's basically just a mock broker with some fake services that it has. And we'll install that into the cluster as a cluster service broker to illustrate that cluster service brokers and service brokers exist alongside one another. Okay, so if we're going to be creating a namespace broker, obviously we need a namespace. So let's create a highly secret namespace called foo. Okay, so now we have our foo namespace. We've got our brokers running. It looks like. So, oh, I forgot to mention these guys haven't actually installed the broker resources specifically yet, so the catalog doesn't actually know about them, and that's where the difference lies. It's going to be a cluster service broker versus a service broker type. So if we look at the UPS broker, this is your classic cluster service broker. It's about as simple as you can get. It's got a name, UPS broker, and it's got a coordinate that the catalog is going to use to talk to it. Let's go ahead and actually create the namespaced entry for the Ansible broker. That thing was a script because basically I needed to dynamically grab a bunch of certs because it is authenticated. That isn't actually relevant to the new stuff. But I can show you the new resource. So, oops. So you can see here, this is the new kind. So it's a service broker kind as opposed to a cluster service broker. Naturally, that means that it is a namespace type instead of available at the cluster scope. So general users, or not all users of the cluster, are going to be able to see it. Only those that actually have access to the namespace and are looking in that namespace. So it's got a name like a normal broker, and of course the new aspect of this is that it also exists inside of a namespace, and it happens to be foo. The spec is pretty much the same. It is there is like a minor difference, but for the most part you're going to find the same fields here. It's got a URL and then some auth info so the catalog can authenticate and talk to it. None of that is really new. Okay, so let's actually see if we can find these. So let's get the cluster service brokers. Oops, we didn't actually create it. do a kubectl. Okay, have an alias set up. Okay, create UPS broker. Okay, so now if we do a get cluster service brokers, we'll see there's the UPS broker, and notably the automation broker is not in that list. So if I do a get service brokers, which is the new type, I'm also going to have to provide that a namespace to search in. So we installed or we created the service broker resource in the foo namespace. So we expect to find the automation broker record in the foo namespace. And likewise, the UPS broker is also missing from this list. So let's see. So now that those have been created, we should be able to actually see the service classes that they offer. So if I do a get cluster service classes, I can see the 3 services. Those are going to be from the UPS broker. Let me dump that to YAML and prove that. I think it's external name. Okay, so we've got the 3 user provided services, and they're available on the cluster scope level. Of course, the cluster service classes are basically the combination of all cluster service brokers and what they offer. So it's, and everybody in the cluster is going to have access to those. The new addition are the service classes. And again, we actually have to look these up in a specific namespace. And you're only going to be able to see these if you have access to that namespace and the appropriate roles in the case of RBAC. So if we do get service classes, we see a list of 5, and they've got SHAs. So again, let's try and dump that to YAML and do a search. And we can see that these are coming from the automation broker, and of course our top secret APB is available in that namespace. And to double check, we can see that we'll search the UPS broker's namespace, and there is nothing in that namespace. So I think that's pretty much it for this demo. We basically saw the creation of service brokers, classes, and plans as opposed to cluster service brokers, and we expect to have the provisioning aspect of this to be able to actually provision these things. That's coming down the pipe pretty soon. I think that's it. Thank you very much for watching.